Well, that was an ass whooping. Hello, hello. Going to be going over Iowa's 19-point loss to Purdue Monday night. Not as close as the score would indicate. And there was always a fear of this, I think, going in. You just had a feel, even before Purdue lost to Northwestern, when I made my video previewing this matchup before they lost Northwestern, you got the sense that Purdue would be really motivated to prove that teams that press full court wouldn't bother them this year. I had a feeling that that would be a real point they would be really motivated to prove. And then they lose Northwestern, and all of a sudden they have, again, like that just only adds to that motivation, like to prove that, hey, those turnover issues we had against Northwestern, the turnover issues we had last year against Fairleigh Dickinson or whomever, we're not going to let that become an issue this year. And you can tell they were really focused. The only chance Iowa had going into this game would have come from our full court press really making an impact on the game, forcing them to double-digit turnovers, letting Iowa work offensively against a defense that wasn't set. And just none of that happened. Purdue was dicing it from the midpoint in the first half on throughout the rest of the course of the game. The press, you can't even really think of one time when the press even really made them even a little bit uncomfortable that I can remember. That being said, it's still a little disappointing because I talked in the last video how I thought like Iowa still needed to press from the first minute to the last minute, after every make, after every dead ball, just because that's the only way Iowa's going to be able to get any stops. And it's just disappointing. Like I still just maintain that it took too long for us to get in that press. And I guess you can look back and say like, oh God, it wouldn't have worked anyway, because Purdue was dicing up the entire game. But the first moment Iowa started showing their 1-2-2 press was with around 8 minutes to go when we were down 32-16. And we were having our point guard pick up full court against Braden Smith or Lance Jones, whomever was bringing the ball up for Purdue, but not showing our 1-2-2 press. And sure, you can say the 1-2-2 press was ineffective in the entire game, so why are you nitpicking that it took around 12 minutes to get to it? It's just a little frustrating because it felt like I felt like it would have been a better idea to throw that press to them earlier and maybe do more to get Purdue out of their rhythm early. Instead, what happened is you kind of gave Purdue an opportunity to get comfortable, score 32 points in 12 minutes, build a real offensive rhythm, and then you throw it at Purdue. But the problem is by the time you start throwing that press at them, they've already built a good rhythm, and they've already built confidence. And it just wasn't going to work after that from there on out. So, I mean, it's a nitpick, and it might not have mattered anyway, but I am a little disappointed that it took 12 minutes. Again, it's something we did last year was full court press after every single make and dead ball. It just took us a while last year for us to get our offense going so we could set up our press more consistently. In this game was a little different. We actually had our offense wasn't like clicking like at a silly high level, not the level that maybe Iowa fans are used to, but we were still getting enough buckets where I felt like, okay, like the game is still kind of in the balance. It's within single digits, 10 points or so. And it just felt like there was more opportunities for pressing in that point in time because we were making baskets, and that gives you an opportunity to set up that 1-2-2 press. But Iowa chose not to, and if I'm being honest, it might not have mattered anyway. Everything had to go right for Iowa in order for them to win this kind of game. They had a chance if that press again was working well, but it just wasn't working well, and we didn't have much of a chance beyond that. And they kept going with the press, and I don't have a problem with them necessarily keeping going with that press because I would have liked to see it from the first minute. But the reason why they're pressing all games is just because of Purdue's offensive rebound ability. Edey's load. Purdue rebounded 45.7% of their misses. And you're just not. There was one point, like particularly on the game, where they had like 5 offensive rebounds, and Iowa only had like 1 defensive rebound in that early stretch. And I stopped keeping track specifically until the very end, but it's not particularly surprising. Iowa only lost by 6 in the total rebounding category at the end of this game, but that was because we got a lot of offensive rebounds. Our defense rebounding was poor. And it's not necessarily that much a surprise. Like if you go to the advanced analytics sites, and I'll just go to KenPom here just as an example, and you just look at Fran McCaffrey, not just from his time at Iowa, his time at Siena, his time at UNC Greensboro, because those are the dates that show up in KenPom. You can make an argument that defensive rebounding is the biggest systemic weakness of his team's defenses, which is saying a lot. That's the biggest weakness of his defense. But the stats really bear that out. One of the more interesting things is last year, a lot of people talked about how last year wasn't a very good rebound year. And it wasn't a very good rebounding year. But we actually only allowed opponents last year to rebound 27.4% of the misses. That was actually the lowest of the Fran McCaffrey era. So last year was actually technically our best defensive rebounding year. There was a lot being said about how like the defense rebound issues would fix themselves with personnel changes, and you introduce guys like Owen, Evan Bruns, you add him in the transfer portal, you add a guy like Ben Krikke. There was a lot made about how that would fix Iowa's defense rebounding woes from last year. The reality is like last year was just like what it normally is. Again, it's actually the best defensive rebounding year of the Fran McCaffrey era at Iowa. It's just not like a strength of our program, defense rebounding. We generally hit the offensive glass really well, and we hit the offensive glass well in this game. And it's great to see guys hustle, I guess, in that aspect, but the defensive rebounding has just always been a struggle. And a lot of it comes down to, in my opinion, positioning. You just see so many times where it feels like Iowa's just not in good position, whether it be to like contest shots or whatever, and guys are just like in weird spots or not rotating well. And if you're not rotating well, you're not able to find bodies, and then guys can just crash from wherever, whether it be the perimeter or inside. And there's just a lot that happens there. Again, a lot of made about how like bad Iowa's rebounding was last year. I think it's really important to note this actually was the best defensive rebounding year statistically of the Fran era at Iowa. I don't think that's intuitive to people because narratives get kind of shoved down people's throats at times. But that's the reality of the situation. There's some potential with guys like Owen to maybe help the rebounding situation, but it didn't manifest itself in this game, which, I mean, in fairness, you are dealing with somebody 7'4". It's going to be tough rebounding-wise. And it left Iowa really no choice but to try and press all game long because you had to force turnovers because even a Purdue missed shot was going to lead to an offense rebound. So as long as Purdue got up any shot of any kind, that's in theory a good possession just because it gives them a chance to rebound even if they miss the shot. But just like, it's also a very frustrating game just because of the mental breakdowns, again, you see defensively. And a lot of it comes from Iowa's experienced players. It is what it is. And like there are some players who are like you can find it more consistently than others. But really, like you saw it from guys like Tony, Pat, Peyton, not just those guys, but really everybody. But those guys are the guys like, okay, those are your, in theory, best players. You want to see them be consistent defensively. It just really wasn't there. So thinking about this. So I thought I would just like illustrate a couple like instances. Like you can find more instances of mental breakdowns. These are just some like a couple that like pop in my head. I think the first one when it comes to Peyton is that one time when Lance Jones just threw the ball off his back on a baseline out of bounds underplay. It just stuff like that where it's like just not paying attention, not following the play. And again, Peyton's not the most athletic guy, so he's going to occasionally get beat off the dribble. I think he's less prone to mental errors than a lot of Iowa's other experienced players. Though there was one time where he was tagging the roll man off a ball screen action and just left Gillis wide open for a three and didn't even try and close out. And it's like, come on, man. But it was really particularly frustrating watching the beginning portion of the game. And again, like everyone was making mistakes, so you don't necessarily want to out people out, but at the same time, these are experienced players. You kind of just hope for a better play from your more experienced players. And this was a particularly frustrating sequence, I thought. So just drawing it out first, I guess. All right, so thinking about this, so one time I noticed, and I guess I'll label names here, the two that I noticed. So, well, you see Tony on the weak side. Their ball is right here. Tony's on the weak side. He's in good position here, in position to close out if they skip the ball, in position to potentially help. But Pat and there were a couple particular mental breakdowns from Pat McCaffrey in the game, and it was starting to build up to the point where I was like, oh, come on, man. And he does it from time to time, but it just was noticeable in the first part of the game. So what you saw here is this player for Purdue, I think it was Braden Smith or one of their point guards. Don't quote me on that, but it just that's what I think it was. So what you saw here is this player, the ball was here, and whoever was defending the corner was applying good pressure. So this guy was looking to make a pass. So you saw it was this guard, okay, I'm going to help my teammate come out. And Pat saw that and decided to move with the guard. But as he's moving there, you can see that Pat is moving towards the ball, but he's only looking at the ball. He's not doesn't have his head on this guy at all. So I think it was Brandon Smith. Well, he saw that, and he eventually just like went back close to the top of the key. And the frustrating thing is, Tony saw that and made a play to like, okay, like Pat's falling asleep. I have to stop this because this would be a really easy pass for a good shooter at the top of the key. And whoever had the ball in the corner saw that and decided to skip the ball the entire across the court, and it led to a wide open three. And it's just a product of Pat just not paying attention to his assignment. He loses track of his man, and his man isn't. He thinks his man is still going towards the ball, but he's started going back to the top of the key. And Tony recognized that and tried to help out, but it left Tony in a position where he had to guard two players, and that's just going to result in a wide open shot for somebody. Which is not to say even like Tony wasn't immune. There was one time where Purdue was just setting a simple pin down on one side of the floor. Simple pin down. And like Tony's guy like, accepts the screen, whatever, and Tony just doesn't see. He just stays in the painted area. And I believe it led to a wide open Miles Colvin 3, if I remember correctly. And I believe he missed it, but it led to an offensive rebound opportunity anyway, because that's what happened in this game, a lot of offensive rebounds. But still, just like, you would find like mental errors where like players just aren't paying attention to their assignments, don't see ball, don't see man. And those are just two instances I highlighted from Tony and Pat, but it was really anybody. It's just disappointing again to see it from your experienced players, particularly from Tony, because I think highly of him defensively. Not that he's perfect, but he's generally our best perimeter defender. I've made note that I think he's separated himself amongst our perimeter defenders this year so far, and just didn't really show in that play. And Iowa's ball screen coverage was a real struggle in this game. So if you've been following Iowa long enough, I think you have a feel for how Iowa likes to cover ball screens. What Iowa has, whoever is responsible for the hedge and the ball screen opportunity, whoever's setting the screen, whoever's guarding that player, we have that. It's generally our 5-man who is the hedger, extends really far out. And what's Iowa trying to do that? We're trying to stop the point guard from being able to turn around the corner or get downhill, make a play for himself to score, and we're trying to get that point guard to retreat. And what we want to do is have high active hands, so that when the person who's setting the screen rolls to the rim, we have high active hands, so we're able to take away that pass, and once whoever's defending the ball initially recovers from that screen and gets back to their guarding the guard, point guard, who have you, then the big player, the center, the hedger, whoever is responsible there, can get back to their assignment, get back to the roll man, or sometimes whoever's popping to the perimeter for a shot. But a lot of times you'll see teams choose to roll against Iowa because of how far out we extend our center guarding those ball screens. It makes a really long recovery if someone's rolling to the rim, and it puts pressure on whoever's guarding the ball initially to really get over that screen. Because otherwise, whoever's hedging is just going to be out there for too long, and eventually, the guard is going to be able to find the right passing angle to hit that roll man. And you really saw that really hurt Iowa a lot. And you see this from time to time where just teams kill Iowa with that action. And what Purdue often does, what they have their players do is just they'll have whoever's out on this wing come set a down screen for one of their guards on the block. Sometimes it's Lawyer, sometimes it's Smith. They vary it, but they have a player come set a down screen on the block, have this player come up and receive a dribble handoff in a ball screen from Edey, Trey Kaufman, run whoever. And what they're doing there is they're trying to, whoever is this Iowa defender down here guarding whoever is going to eventually handle with the ball, they're trying to set a screen just to get a little separation. So whoever receives this ball screen for Purdue doesn't have anyone attached defensively. It gets Iowa's defenders behind, and it really forces, again, whoever's hedging out really far for Iowa to stay there a lot longer than they like, because whoever's guarding that ball handler is way far behind because they just got screened. And Iowa was really struggling with that quite a bit. And the frustrating thing I think about, again, Iowa's ball screen coverage is not just the fact that often it leaves the roll man way too wide open for way too long. In this kind of game, it's also kind of frustrating because you have a player like Edey, who's a big target, rolling to the rim, and it's hard to miss a big target like that if he's wide open for 2, 3, 4 seconds, whatever. But on top of that, when he gets a free roll to the rim like that and no one's really checking him, he's able to establish really good position. So even if Iowa, in theory, defends that initial action well and doesn't allow Purdue to hit the roll man, he just sets up position way too deep from then on out. And what happens when you have deep position? Well, even if he doesn't get the ball, he's right under the rim. If they miss a shot, he's in perfect position for a rebound. And that's because there was no one really to push him out of the lane, because the person who would theoretically push him out of the lane is all the way out on the perimeter. It's just really frustrating, and Purdue really made Iowa pay. There's not much to be said. It was not a very good defensive performance at all. I think things I guess got a little bit better at times with our bench, but again, those guys are young, they're inexperienced, they make mistakes too. It is what it is. I've talked a lot in my last video about how the impact I thought Owen was making defensively, and like show the statistics. Like, okay, Iowa was much better with him defensively when he's on the floor. We were actually giving up the less than a point per possession against all the good teams we played up until this point this year with Owen on the floor. And it's a really tough matchup for Owen in this game. I don't want to hold Ben Krikke or Owen Freeman's feet to the fire too much for any of the defensive issues. It's really a tough ask to ask someone to go that far out on the perimeter, guarding those ball screens, and then recover all the way and have to push Edey out of the lane. They're not going to be able to push Edey out of the lane when he's already that deep position-wise. It's just not going to happen. He's just too big and too strong. So I don't want to hold their feet to the fire too much for any defensive failings. I think it's a scheme thing, if anything. It was nice to see Owen only pick up 2 fouls, I guess. He had one of the worst foul rates in the Big Ten early on in the year, and he's really done a good job the last couple games holding back on fouling. And when they had their backups in the game, he also showed again that quick ability to get around a steal, a post steal, and get a steal. That was near the end of the game. You can tell he's a playmaker. He got a couple blocks against Draycoff and Wren. I think he blocked first shot too, or maybe they didn't count that as a block. I forget. But you know he has active hands. He's more athletic than people realize. Able to get around steals to steal the ball. Able to block shots. He'll make an impact defensively against normal human beings. That kid is just not a normal human being, and he's a great player. You want to give credit to that. It's a tough matchup, and it's going to be a tough matchup for more players besides Owen. I don't want to criticize the Bigs too much defensively in this game, honestly. And amongst our bench players, I still maintain that someone like Josh Dix is just the best Iowa has at avoiding being screened. I think, though I will say, I think this is something else I thought, I guess, coming into the year. Brock Harding just has more quickness than anyone else on the roster. If you watch Brock's feet defensively, that side-to-side movement ability, and just in general, his agility in tight spaces. He's the quickest player on the team. I think it also showed a little bit defensively at times in this game. There's one time he got caught trying to poke a ball loose and on a steal, and it's just like, no, you're quick enough probably to stay in front of people, honestly. And he's still obviously skinny. He still needs to go through the weight program and go through that getting stronger process. And you hope that he can maintain his quickness as he gets stronger. But there were a couple times when I think if you paid close attention and you just watch his feet, Brock's feet they're just quicker than everyone else's on the team. It's really noticeable. And I think in theory, like there's some potential for Iowa defensive in the perimeter. Again, I think Josh is capable to an extent defensively. There might be some assignments he can't handle athletic-wise, but I think he's a little underrated athletically. Brock, I think, has quick feet, but again, there's going to be moments when people are just going to power through him and try and play bully ball. How will he respond to that? That remains to be seen. I remember North Florida in the last game really made an emphasis to try and get Brock in the post and score over in that area. And Tony and DeSante, I think, are capable defensively as well. I think, although there's times when they got dusted in this game, in fairness, I don't know if there's any great defenders, but I think there's at least some capabilities defensively that it could have been a lot better than it was tonight. But again, a lot of it is scheme related, in my opinion, and just mentally checking out more than necessarily their athletic capabilities, which is frustrating, but you just kind of get used to it, unfortunately, at a certain point. So I guess if I want to talk about offense for a little bit, it's just I don't want to I guess the first thing I'll say is that Purdue really made us work in the half court offensively, and that's not what we want to do. We want to push pace. We want to get in transition. We want to shoot threes. We want to get layups in that way. And there were some moments late in the game that we were able to do that a little bit more. There was one time where Peyton was able to get the ball in like our secondary break and attack and find Ben in a layup. There are a couple times where Pat McCaffrey saw transition opportunities and took the opportunity to get fouled or whatnot. And a couple times where Tony got going in transition, though he still settled for like mid-range shots, even in transition, which is like that's the one time you don't want to settle for mid-range shots against Purdue because Edey isn't back defensively. It's okay to go all the way to the rim in that case, and he took one floater where it's like he actually took two floaters, I guess, in transition. He actually made one, but it's still like, no, you can probably just go all the way to the rim. And he was off in his mid-range game, 1 for 7 for mid-range, Tony was. And our team in general was off in the mid-range. What were we? We were 5 for 23, for mid-range. That was a stark contrast from the Creighton game. And this is kind of a similar assignment from an offensive standpoint to the Creighton game. You have a 7-foot plus center who's defensively sound, capable of blocking shots. They're going to ask him to sit in the lane and play drop coverage. And like Creighton, there's not necessarily the best athleticism on the perimeter. But Purdue did a good job of applying ball pressure and making things difficult for a lot of our guys on the perimeter. Again, knowing that Edey was back there to block shots, even if they got beat. But in the Creighton game, we were really on point from the mid-range. Ben Cricky was amazing in that game from the mid-range. And you can even tell by the way Purdue was guarding. Like normally you see teams kind of like allow other teams to shoot those mid-range shots. And while Edey was playing drop coverage when our guys are going downhill against him, if you're paying attention to the rest of the players, a lot of their other players really made a point of emphasis to meet Iowa's players when they got into the mid-range. You can tell that Purdue took a note from that Creighton performance from Iowa. It's like, all right, we need to be a little bit more due diligent about not allowing Iowa to get comfortable in that mid-range. And they tried to take that away from Iowa, and they made it difficult in a lot of ways. And it's probably, and when you think about, Brock was a 1 for 5 from the mid-range. He had one floater, which was great to see, but I don't know. Brock I don't think is really proven to be a reliable shooter, honestly, through his first couple games, which I guess could turn around. The season's still young. But Brock, DeSante, both our point guards really just aren't really, to me, developing as shooters. They can create for themselves off the bounce. I think Brock got to the rim a couple times. There was one time he rejected a screen going right and went back left and got a scoop with his right hand going left. Another time just jabbed right and went back left and got that floater. Even Asante, probably a little bit better offensively than I probably would have expected going into this game. Not that he played a lot of minutes, he only played 13 minutes. But there was one time he took it really strong to the rim. It just missed, but it led to an offensive rebound opportunity for Iowa because he attracted so much attention. And he got a clean look for himself. But it is a really tough game for a guy like DeSante just because, again, he's shooting up from around the rim a very high percentage. So he's capable of finishing around the rim, but again, when you're playing someone like Edey, just finishing around the rim is so difficult. So it just didn't necessarily feel like a game for a guy like DeSante, although I think he was able to actually get into the paint and make plays for himself and others at times. But I do think it's a tough matchup. I think he'll probably be better going forward. It's really, again, it's really difficult for guys like Peyton and Pat in a game like this because those two, while they can create for themselves off of 1 or 2 dribbles and get to their mid-range, they can hit contested shots. They can hit shots off the move. There's some versatility to their shooting. You don't want them dribbling too much, though. And when, again, Purdue was applying pressure, not allowing them to get clean looks, and just those catch and shoots generally weren't there. There were a couple times where Peyton found himself free and worked well off screens, but those were very rare. Purdue's a very good defensive team. But if him and Pat, like, they can score from the mid-range, they can score contested shots, but it's difficult when they're asked to dribble more than once or twice for them to really score. And I think you saw that in this game. They couldn't really free themselves up just because they don't really have really the athleticism to create space for themselves. If whoever's guarding them stays on the floor and makes them put the ball on the floor more than once or twice. Yeah, it just really wasn't their game. And Peyton hit one contested three, and there were a couple times where he just missed a little bit long. So I guess he was technically online with his shots, but again, it just wasn't his game. It was nice to see Tony again take the ball to the rim. I think Tony was probably our most consistent offensive player in terms of, like, again, being able to get to the rim and finish, whether it be in like transition or just in half-court settings, whether he's cutting off the ball or maybe getting offensive rebounds. Yeah, but just really just not a game because, again, like, if your mid-range shot really isn't hitting, and none of our players had their mid-range shots going. Even Ben Cricky really wasn't able to get going from mid-range. But again, it's really hard to finish around the rim consistently with a guy like Edey. So Iowa need to hit their jumpers, and again, Iowa then need to be able to set their press up to get enough steals, so they didn't have to go against set defense with Edey, but that just didn't happen. So there's not much to be said there. Again, I don't really even want to judge our fives, Owen or Ben, too much offensively. Because when you're asked to go up against like a guy like Edey, it's just really hard to score. And Owen, God bless him, he tried a couple of times to go at Edey, and he got blocked once. He pulled it out the other time, but it's just a different animal, that dude. So it's just not much to be said there. It is what it is. Just, I guess, thinking about some things you can probably make note of for some of Iowa's freshmen off the bench. I think Lodgy is still getting a little bit better defensively. He gives good effort. I don't think effort's really a problem with him. And sometimes he's in the wrong spot defensively, but I think it's gotten a little bit better in comparison to the first couple games, which is good to see. Because it was not very good early on in the season, but I think he's incrementally making progress. And a couple of shots didn't go his way. That one mid-range opportunity just allowed, again, that there was a Purdue player who just flashed from his left and got a quick contest in, and he didn't quite trust himself from that point on, but then decided to shoot it anyway. And it's just one of the situations where, like, he'd be better off, like, no, you see that contest, put the ball on the floor, and either create a better shot for yourself, get more in a rhythm, or use that dribble to then create maybe an opportunity for somebody else. It'll be interesting to see, again, because I really like his shooting motion. It'll be really interesting to see if he can develop a shot outside of catch-and-shoot situations. Because I remember he had that one really nice fadeaway mid-range jumper against Creighton, but really beyond that, it's mostly been catch-and-shoot from him. And really not even a lot of taking people off the bounce either. And Price Sanford showed, I think, some more of that versatility that people are talking about. Driving left, spinning right, and hitting a fadeaway jumper near the end of the game. Like his brother, I think he's a versatile shooter off of one or two dribbles. Again, you probably don't want either of them dribbling too much. In general, though, I think probably one of the bigger frustrations I would probably have, again, is not a lot of minutes in general for guys like Lodgy and Price or Brock or DeSante or Josh or whatever in a blowout game like this. Like, okay, you get blown out, and like take the opportunity, I guess, then to put your freshmen out there and let them, I guess, learn a little bit on the fly. But a lot of them played around like 10 to 12 minutes, and it's like, man, it's like, it just feels like an opportunity, like, okay, like the game's over. Take an opportunity to get some development for those guys, and it just didn't really happen, which is honestly a little frustrating. In fairness, there was that one stretch at the under 4 section of the second half where just the refs clearly wanted the game to be over with, so they just weren't calling anything, and the players were dead tired. They were running up and down, and the bench players were sitting at the scores table for a while looking to be checked in. So I guess maybe you probably want to get there in sooner. Yeah. I still would have probably liked to see them play more. In general, it felt like an opportunity. Like, okay, the game's done, dusted. Just kind of move on and see what your bench can do. But yeah, I don't really want to talk too much about a game like this because there's just not much being said. It wasn't a very good showing. And when you start thinking about like, okay, like who do you want to give defensive/hustle player of the game? Because I normally want to give out those kind of awards in this kind of game. And we were really pushing the envelope as to whether I would even give out that award because it was really that bad for a while. It's just like nothing was working for defensively, and like how can you praise anything defensively if nothing's working well? I think if I were to probably give like one thought, I'd probably say like Brock showed a little bit defensively. I think when Brock isn't being overpowered by like stronger players, just because again he's still working on strength and conditioning from that aspect. I thought Brock showed a good job of moving his feet, showed active hands. There was one time I think he recognized that he was guarding Mason Gillis, and he recognized, okay, this isn't somebody who normally handles the ball. I can potentially take the ball off him. And he showed quick hands then to get a steal from him there and start a fast break for Iowa. And I think he has really quick feet. There were times when they were trying to get a screen on him, and he was able to avoid it decently well. Again, I don't really think any player would probably say they're really happy with their defense performance in this game. But I guess if I were to just think about one player to defense, I'd probably say it's Brock. I guess, and I don't necessarily want to like, because one thing I will say, Iowa did keep playing hard to a certain extent late in the game. I don't think Iowa stopped playing. So I guess in a nod to that, I guess I'll give out a defense/hustle player of the game award to Brock. Just to acknowledge the fact that, hey, at least Iowa kept trying, although the defense wasn't good, and I was seriously considering just not giving out that award at all. Because it was really going in that direction. And in terms of just game ball in general, again, really hard to give that award out either. Again, not a very good game for many players. I guess if I were to give out one game ball, I guess I'd probably say either Owen or Ben, just because I think it's a really tough matchup just to ask to go against Edie. And like, sure, there's going to be moments where it struggles, but I mean, at least you've put up a good effort in like trying to, I guess, to do stuff against him. I'd probably lean towards Owen. But again, like, it's not saying much. It's a tough matchup for a guy like Owen as a freshman. You can start to see tendencies develop for players. Owen really likes to spin baseline when he sees the opportunity in the post. That he's almost done that in every single game we've watched so far this year. And Trey Coffin-Wren clearly didn't read the scouting report on that aspect of Owen's game, but it is what it is. I think he tried to fight Edie. I think he tried to take it at Edie offensively at times, and I guess the mindset you can applaud. And again, showed some defensive potential again when he didn't have to guard a player like Edie, able to get some steals and blocks. So I guess I'll give it to Owen. Yeah, but I guess we probably should move on. So because it's a really important game on Thursday, Hilton Coliseum, Iowa State. Not a place that I'm used to Iowa winning. Only seen Iowa win there one time in my lifetime, or maybe they won one time before I started watching, but only one time since I actually started paying attention when I was a little kid. Yeah, it's not somewhere you're used to winning. Though Iowa State is off to a decent start, I guess, this year, but it's kind of it's honestly a little similar to Iowa in many ways in how they've done so far in the non-conference, where both teams have taken apart the teams you'd expect them to take apart. Iowa State's probably been a little bit more convincing in a lot of their games against mid-majors than Iowa's been, but both teams have generally beaten those kind of opponents. But both teams kind of like iffy against the better teams they've played. Iowa State only went 1-2 in their holiday tournament, the ESPN Invitational, I think it was. Iowa's only gone 1-2 in their non-conference games against the good opponents they played. So both teams looking to pick up probably a non-conference win that'll resonate to an extent, because I don't think VCU or Seton Hall are really the kind of wins that either team wants to hang their hats on. It's probably a little bit more of an important game for Iowa from the standpoint that the Big Ten is a down conference year. The net rankings came out a couple days ago, and I believe there's 4 Big Ten teams who rank 100th or worse in the net rankings. I didn't look at the Big Ten or the Big 12 net rankings, but I can probably guarantee you that it's higher than the Big Ten. It's been the best conference in college basketball the last couple of years. And you add teams like Houston. BYU is a new Big 12 team this year, and they're weirdly top 10 in KenPom and playing really well. And that's not even getting to teams like Kansas or Baylor. So there's a lot of opportunities for Iowa State to get quality wins in conference play. So I don't think Iowa State necessarily needs to do that well in the non-conference to pick up good wins. But in Iowa's case, again, the Big Ten's a little down this year, or way down, though it has time, I guess, to fix things up, but it's down so far this year. So Iowa really needs to do something non-conference that really resonates, I think, to feel good about their chances to make things for the tournament. Because I think Iowa still has a talent to make that the tournament, but things have to go their way, obviously. And it feels like this is a good opportunity because Iowa State's a good team, but they're not unbeatable, etc. So I guess thinking about Iowa State, obviously a team that's built their backbone on defense the last couple of years under TJ. That no middle defense that they run, where they purposely they position their defenders in a way to send the offense to the baseline, and that's where they place their traps. And the thing about you force someone baseline, you trap them there. The baseline acts as the third defender on top of the 2 players that are guarding the ball, and they get a lot of turnovers that way. I really hope Iowa doesn't fall into that trap, and Iowa did a good job of not falling into that trap generally last year. Other times, you see Iowa players dribbling there, but not as much as you see some teams do. Iowa generally found ways to get the ball into the middle of the floor. But I think the interesting thing about Iowa State, while they have a really good adjusted defense ranking right now in KenPom, in their last 4 games, which again have all come across against at least not bad opponents, although DePaul is legitimately terrible. But they're at least a Power 6 team, I guess. But in their last 4 games against Power 6 teams in VCU, they've given up over a point per possession in all 4 of those games. It's not something you're really used to seeing from Iowa State. Again, a good defensive team will hold similar competition to under a point of possession. So Iowa State hasn't actually been as good defensively in these last couple of games as you've come to expect. I think some of it's a little bit work personnel to an extent. A lot of their players feel like they're either really good on offense and maybe lacking on defense, or really good on defense and lacking on offense. It's probably a team where okay, you probably want a couple more two-way players. And the nice thing, I guess, about Iowa State the last couple of years is they've had a lot of experience and they had a lot of tough-minded defenders. So I think it built everyone on the roster kind of had a collective identity around being tough-nosed, experienced, and good on defense. And it feels like there's a little bit still of an identity probably to be figured out just watching Iowa State in their tournament. it still feels like maybe a little bit of an identity that needs to be identified. Still work in progress. They're relying more on freshmen this year, Milan Chilovic. It's interesting. I don't really follow recruiting super much, but there are certain guys you hear a lot about, and Omaha Blue out of Milwaukee is definitely a guy like, okay, you hear a lot about, like 5-star recruit, top 20 recruit. A guy for the longest time, I felt like the rumors was he was just going to go on that G League Ignite team and and after that he would just go to the NBA draft prospect and probably get taken first round because of the athletic tools and skill he has. But it's interesting, like the last 3 games, all under 10 minutes, and he hasn't really played that much at all this year, which is interesting. But also very scary because you don't want to be lulled into thinking there's nothing there. He has talent, he has skill. And again, he's in that 3-4 mold where he's going to be matched up against guys like Patrick or Peyton defensively or Price or Lodgy. And there's an athletic gap there, and a part of me is really scared that a guy like TJ, who's really smart, is going to be able to look at what Iowa has in our front court and think, like, there's no one athletically who can hang with Omaha. And maybe this is the game that Omaha has unleashed, an Omaha breakout. And I'm really scared of that from Iowa's perspective, because I don't think Iowa would have an answer for a guy like that if he gets going. A guy like Robert Jones, like, sure, he gives great energy. And you can say a lot about him as an experienced player or whatever, but I would feel a lot more comfortable, honestly, from Iowa having like Peyton, having a guy like Robert Jones having to guard a guy like Peyton Sanford on the perimeter, or maybe they'll put Milan Momcilovic on Peyton Sanford, which again would not go well. Or even if they decide to put Robert Jones like a guy like Pat McCaffrey, again, that wouldn't go well. Pat can shoot the ball, Pat can score around him, etc. And again, Milan Momcilovic, you watch him and you can see the skill automatically. A great shooter, a guy who can hit contested shots in the 3-point range, in the mid range, around the rim, etc. You can see that skill, and that's evident watching him play. But it's kind of interesting, just from a pure physicality and rebounding standpoint. His offensive rebounding percentage is 1.4. There's only one player in Iowa State's entire rotation that has a lower offensive rebounding rate, and even his defensive rebounding rate is actually the lowest of any player in Iowa State's rotation. So they're playing a player at the 5 who's their second worst offensive rebounder and worst defensive rebounder. I think that's a product of probably what's leading to a lot of their defensive issues. Like, you don't really want to see that from your center or 4-man or whatever position Momcilovic plays. And if you're TJ, you're probably going to get to looking to get that turned around, because that really can't happen. And it's kind of surprising that, again, a guy like TJ, who's built his backbone on defense so far through these first couple of years in Iowa State, would play Milan over Omaha. That's just weird. I haven't watched or read, I guess, because I watched their holiday games. Haven't really read anything from the Iowa State side on why that is, why Omaha Blue isn't playing as much. It's just kind of interesting that TJ would have gone that route, given what we know about how he's built this program so far. But to be honest, I kind of like Iowa's front court matchups in this game. Again, unless, TJ sees the athleticism that Omaha can bring to the game and decides to go there and change the game up. In that case, I'm really, really scared of that, because there's talent there. I guess you know that they only have 2 players shooting above 30% from 3. Milan's shooting above 40%, and to me and Lipsy, their point guard, shooting 36%. He's a weird player. Again, I don't necessarily watch Iowa State that much. I mostly stick to just watching Big Ten games, because there's only so many college basketball games you can watch. I try and watch NBA too. So there's only so many college basketball games you can watch just in general. So I mostly stick to Big Ten in Iowa. But even just going back to last year's game, just in my head, like, I remember Tameen having like kind of a loose handle at times, and he wasn't a shooter then. But at the same time, he's doing really well so far this year. So I might have just gotten him maybe on a bad game last year when Iowa played Iowa State. I don't want to judge, I guess, a player too harshly after only seeing them one game. He's probably better than he showed last year. But a little bit turnover prone. He's had 10 turnovers his last 3 games. Again, does he have a loose handle? I don't think I'm really qualified to say that because I don't necessarily watch them enough. It'd be something I guess I'll look for. But he's played, I guess, well for Iowa State so far. And he has some game to him, I guess. Yeah. And from a defensive standpoint, it's just another thing. So a lot of announcers like to talk about how Iowa makes more free throws than their opponent attempts. We really want to attack and get to the free throw line. In these last 4 games that Iowa State's played against all their good teams they played so far, and DePaul, because I don't want to call DePaul a good team because they're not. They've allowed teams to have over a 39% free throw attempt rate allowed. What does that mean? Free throw attempt rate is just the amount of free throws as a percentage of how many field goal attempts you make. So if you have a free throw attempt rate of like 50%, that means you had 50% as many free throw attempts as you had field goal attempts. And it's a really high percentage. Iowa generally allows teams in the 20s or teens just because Iowa doesn't foul a lot. So you've seen a lot in these last couple of games for Iowa State is they're really aggressive fouling, and that makes sense. They want to force turnovers. They want to get out and run transitions so they don't necessarily have to play against a set defense. To me, Lipsy, again, is very active defensively, and that's where he really makes his calling card is stealing the ball, applying ball pressure, etc. And they have athletes, again, where it'd be like a guy like Trey King or Gilbert or Jones or whoever have you. So they're going to be looking to bother Iowa there. And again, the good news, I guess, from Iowa's standpoint is you have one of the lowest turnover rates in the entire country. Iowa takes good care of the ball. It's our calling card generally. It's the program. It's our assist to turnover ratio, how well we pass the ball, how well we take care of the ball, etc. And we had a lot of turnovers in the game last year against Iowa State, but what we did a really good job of last year, when they would send those traps, particularly on the perimeter against us, we did a really good job, particularly finding Rebracha last year on those short rolls, and then moving the ball quickly from there. Phillip probably had his highest career assist game that game. And it wasn't just Phillip. Like, Iowa really moved the ball quickly from side to side. Because, again, in that no-middle defense, they're sending you to the baseline, and they're kind of overloading. Because what they want you to do is they want you to drive into those traps, and then their help comes and takes away the nearest passing attempt. So what they're really doing is kind of overloading a lot one side of the floor defensively. And if you move the ball really quickly from side to side or throw that skip pass to the weak side, you're going to find shooters open on the opposite side for threes or whatever. And Iowa did a really good job of that in last year's game. So that's something to keep an eye on. Like, does Iowa State try and trap on the perimeter again like they did last year? Because, again, Iowa really made them pay with the short roll with Rebracha last year. And Ben Krickey's a really skilled passer and player just in general. He's comfortable in that mid-range. So if Iowa State just throws that same strategy out there again, Iowa's probably going to be able to make them pay, unless Iowa's missing their three-point shots, which is possible. We were really good from 3 last year against Iowa State, which helped. Yeah. But the thing about this kind of game is, like, I know TJ's a smart defensive coach, so I'm very skeptical they're going to take the same approach they did last year to guarding Iowa. That would probably be a mistake because it feels like Iowa would be comfortable against that. So they're probably going to change things up to a degree. How they will do that, I do not know. We'll have to watch the game to see. But I imagine Iowa State would probably change their approach to a slight degree. But yeah, I think it's a game that isn't impossible to win. You're just so used to Iowa losing Hilton that it's hard to see it happen or envision it happen or predict it happen. Though I think there is a puncher's chance at least. And I guess the good news, from Iowa's standpoint, is you've already played 2 road environments so far this year. So I guess you're used to it to a certain extent. Although the energy that Iowa State will bring is going to be different than the way that Purdue or Creighton brings, because they hate Iowa much more than those two teams do. So it'll be a tough game, but hopefully a game that we can win, because it would really go a long way in helping us make the tournament. So I'll catch you sometime post game for that game. I'll see you later.